Good morning, Prime Minister and members of the National Security Committee. Thank you for inviting us here today. My name is Shane Douglas, and I'm joined today by Scott Bacon, Joyce Lai, and Caitlin Kendall O'Gorman. Today, Canada remains a beneficiary of the rules-based order, but that order is fragmenting under sustained geopolitical competition. Our task today is to identify the most urgent national security priorities over the next 4 years and propose concrete, implementable interventions. This strategy would position Canada as a resilient middle power. Next slide, please. Recently, the federal government announced a significant multi-year defense investment. That announcement underscores the urgency of this moment. Our strategy would build on that momentum while addressing the structural gaps that funding alone does not solve. We recommend 4 integrated national security priorities: Arctic sovereignty and credible monitoring, digital sovereignty and secure AI, economic resilience and strategic capacity, social cohesion, and democratic stability. I will begin with Arctic sovereignty. Next slide, please. Arctic sovereignty underpins economic security, domain awareness, and alliance credibility. Maritime routes are becoming more navigable. Russia continues Arctic infrastructure expansion. China is positioning itself as a near Arctic state through dual-use investments. And at the same time, Canada's surveillance systems are aging, and federal authority for monitoring and enforcement remains fragmented across departments with no single coordinating mandate. The risk is not invasion. The risk is erosion of credibility. And if Canada cannot monitor the Arctic effectively, it cannot credibly govern it. By credible monitoring, we mean integrated maritime surveillance, standardized vessel tracking compliance, and coordinated enforcement authority. Next slide, please. So to address this structural vulnerability, we propose the Canadian Arctic Security Authority, CASA. CASA would be a legislated coordinating authority reporting through the Privy Council office with oversight from the National Security Committee of Cabinet. Its mandate would be to integrate Arctic domain awareness and standardize vessel tracking compliance across departments. CASA would not replace departmental expertise. It would centralize coordination and establish clear accountability for surveillance and enforcement outcomes. Next slide, please. So this reform would be phased and disciplined. Year 1 would establish legislative authority and operational launch. Years 2 and 3 would integrate and modernize surveillance systems. Year 4 would standardize vessel tracking compliance and introduce public performance reporting. And the model would be coordination first and would leverage existing federal assets with an estimated annual investment between $500 million and $1 billion within the expanded defense envelope and NORAD modernization commitments. We recognize implementation challenges, of course: federal coordination complexity, interdepartmental resistance, and the need for careful sovereignty signaling. Embedding CASA at the cabinet level from day one would ensure clarity of authority, while Indigenous advisory participation would strengthen legitimacy and trust. So, if Arctic sovereignty secures our physical geography, digital sovereignty would secure our cognitive geography, control over data, AI systems, and national decision-making autonomy. Scott will now outline how we would secure that digital foundation. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Shane. The Canadian national security dialogue has traditionally been focused on territory and borders, as Shane described. This realm has been under pressure historically. However, a second front has arisen. The contemporary statecraft now involves the exercise of power through technological domains. The increasing reliance of Canada on digital infrastructure, which includes cloud computing, AI systems, and global platforms, are generally foreign control. This has given rise to the threat of a foreign power to influence its national security. Such action could be taken through the manipulation of the information environment, the exploitation of critical services, or access to sensitive information through systems on which Canada is dependent. The threat of AI is the potential for scale and influence operations, the acceleration of cyber activities, and the development of new vectors of intellectual property exploitation. In parallel, the open research environment and the interconnectivity of technology markets in Canada have made it exploitable by competitors. The primary concern has thus evolved from the realm of cybersecurity to the realm of sovereignty. Canada's ability to maintain autonomous decision-making has been impacted. These three types of digital dependency pose a security concern for Canada. First, there is a concern about influence. The potential for AI being used to influence public opinions as well as democratic processes far outpaces the capacity of the Canadian government to defend against them. As a result, trust and resilience are undermined. Second, there is a concern about exposure. Even if information is physically located within Canada, a foreign-owned information technology provider or social media site may possess a technical or legal basis to access that information. Third, there is a concern about exploitation. Although a liberal attitude towards research and innovation is a strength for Canada, it also provides a potential for dual-use technologies such as quantum AI and quantum computing to be exported and utilized against Canada. These types of digital dependencies are all interrelated. Influence, economic pressure, espionage, and cyber attacks are all mutually reinforcing and create an insidious pressure on Canada that can influence its decisions and democracy. Therefore, the policy concern is no longer simply about protecting a network, but about making sure that Canada retains control over its information, research, and AI. Next slide, please. The recommended policy intervention is to establish a digital sovereignty and secure AI framework under the primary authority of the Treasury Board of Canada's Secretariat. This is due to its mandate to control procurement rules, issue policy standards, and govern digital security directives. The framework has three parts. First, it would provide sovereign data protection for highly sensitive government and critical infrastructure information. The intent here is not to seal Canada off from the global community. The goal is to ensure that the most sensitive information remains out of the control of foreign jurisdictions. Second is to provide a national research security regime for dual-use technology via classification. While Canada's universities would continue to engage in international research collaborations, federally funded research in sensitive domains would be subject to risk-based screening and appropriate safeguards. Third is to articulate secure AI procurement standards for the entire federal government. This way, departments would only use AI systems that meet the test of audibility, transparency, and security. The key advantage lies in leveraging the existing powers of the federal government without the need to create a new regulatory structure. The overall intent here is to provide protection without isolation. Next slide, please. This proposal is designed on a 4-year strategy window. In year one, the focus is on establishing a small secretariat which publishes a list of high sensitivity data and procurement standards. The intention is to provide clarity and transparency before imposing regulatory compliance. In years 2 and 3, the research, security, and pilot sectors will be rolled out in critical areas such as health, energy, and telecommunications. By year 4, compliance will be expanded and reporting will become public. This will build trust and legitimacy while encouraging public and private partnerships through shared expectations and understanding. The estimated cost is $800 million over the 4 years, which is modest in comparison to traditional defense spending. It will be funded by reallocating existing digital modernization funding and targeted program resources. The TSL, or Technology Service Levy, would be established as a regulatory recovery fee paid by large platform service providers. The strategic effect is to reduce vulnerability to disruption and foreign interference. It also protects infrastructure, innovation, Canadian data, and most importantly, democratic decision-making. The goal is not simply technological independence, but to ensure that Canada moves towards becoming a resilient middle power that can weather international pressures. Our digital sovereignty is intricately connected to Canada's economic security. As our economy becomes increasingly global, there is a need for further insulating economic strategies, as Joyce will discuss. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Scott. Trade itself is not the concern. The concern is how concentrated Canada's exposure has become. With roughly 75% of merchandise exports going to one market and a narrow export mix, Shocks like tariffs, demand swings, or policy friction can quickly spill into jobs and community, creating a classic single point vulnerability. Our objective is to shift dependence from passive raw materials exports toward domestic value-added capacity, while ensuring the workforce and regional delivery can actually make that capacity real. This is not only economic policy, it is a national security-oriented industrial strategy, turning security goals into capacity and jobs. Next slide, please. To keep this implementable, we assign clear departmental leadership and coordination. Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada leads delivery through existing industrial programming and contribution funding, with support from Employment and Social Development Canada and provincial governments on workforce and regional execution. This does not replace departmental responsibility. It clarifies coordination and accountability so delivery does not fragment. Under this framework, we deploy three instruments. First, value-added capacity incentives, focused on processing, manufacturing, and supply chain capability. Second, sectoral workforce pipelines, upskilling, retraining, and credentialing linked to employer demand. Third, regional industrial labor partnerships, aligning employers, training providers, and on-the-ground delivery. Next slide, please. Implementation is phased over 4 years. Year 1 sets the rules and picks pilot corridors. Year 2 runs the pilots and shows early results. Year 3 expands what works and brings in private co-investments. Year 4 reviews performance and locks in the long-term model. On cost, 4-year public investment total roughly Canadian dollar 600 million to 960 million, delivered as a targeted slice up to 5% within the existing federal envelope, not a new standalone program. With private co-investment entering from year 3, contingent on pilot success, this is not open-ended subsidy, but staged conditional scaling. For feasibility, we focus on most likely risk, coordination delays, and training not keeping pace with employer demand. We manage this with clear milestones and stage funding, and employer design training so it matches the real hiring needs. We also recognize conditions can shift, like fiscal tightening or political resistance. On communications, our message is simple. This is value-added and resilience, not protectionism or decoupling. Private co-investment enters in year 3 only after pilot shows results, so this remains performance-based. If Arctic sovereignty secures Canada's physical geography and digital sovereignty secures data and decision autonomy, economic resilience secures Canada's capacity to act. Caitlin will now close with social cohesion and overall integration. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Joyce. So as my colleagues have outlined several recommendations for getting serious about national security, however, these plans may not succeed if the people of Canada are not willing to cooperate. We cannot defend ourselves from outside threats if we can't manage the political tribalism that's festering within our own household. This is where social cohesion comes into play. In the past decade, we have record levels of population growth via immigration. However, per IRCC's data, Canadian support for immigration has reached a 30-year low as of November 2024. Having grown up in the Canada that considered diversity our greatest strength, this is heartbreaking to see. It should be a red flag to policymakers that newcomers and Canadians are not integrating as seamlessly as they once did. In the past decade, we've also seen many Canadians become increasingly hyper-partisan. While this is multi-causal and not restricted to any particular age or racial demographic, there is a noticeable negative impact among young Canadians as they are both more directly impacted by the consequences of recent immigration mismanagement and also more frequently exposed to extremist groups and cross-border ideological linkages within the digital environment, Next slide, please. So what causes people to become hyperpartisan? It starts with economic anxiety, perceived inequality, and then leads to institutional distrust. So here's an example based on the funnel theory. A youth finishes their education, but they're unable to secure a job and participate in employment. Therefore, they can't afford a lifestyle that is equivalent or superior to that of their parents, which is noted in the Department of Justice's Roadmap to Social Cohesion as a key indicator of cohesion. Hopelessness takes root, mental health starts to plummet, and relationships then suffer, as seen with the increase in young people seeking mental health treatment per CAPPA-ACPAP data and the declining fertility rate per Stats Canada. Vulnerable individuals then withdraw from society, spending more time in online communities and becoming more susceptible to radical influences such as racial supremacy, antinatalism, anti-democracy, religious fundamentalism, etc. Next slide, please. So tying into Joyce's sectoral workforce pipeline programs, our first recommendation, is to formulate a youth engagement policy to guide multiple levels of government in developing frameworks to ensure young Canadians can participate in society and achieve typical milestones, which will keep them engaged in and supportive of Canada's democratic system and national defence. This would include initiatives such as collaboration with employment offices, all levels of government, to reform hiring practices to prioritize Canadians in entry-level and low-skill positions, particularly Canadian youth who are entering the workforce. Outreach with rural students for in-demand fields. It could also include tuition vouchers or paid training for low-income Canadians. And also to add further measures to disincentivize exploitation of the temporary foreign worker program, which has been compared by some to modern-day slavery by critics following Amnesty International's 2025 report, which revealed testimonies including unpaid wages, sexual abuse, and other misconduct committed by Canadian employers against foreign workers, which fuels the all Westerners are evil mindset on an international level. Secondly, we propose a modernized communication strategy. Collaboration with social media platforms to remove current bans on news due to Bill C-18, so that young Canadians will stay up to date on what's happening on our side of the border instead of down south. Take some of the money that was announced yesterday for TV patriotic advertising and address the censorship of news on social media instead. Otherwise, these patriotic ads may just be perceived as tone-deaf propaganda by citizens who've already passed the threshold of disenfranchisement. Next slide, please. To wrap it all together, our proposed Stand on Guard national security strategy is a four-pillared industrial strategy that will ensure long-term economic and social stability within our country via Arctic, digital, economic, and communication interventions. By shifting our current communication strategy to focus on social media, it will allow Government of Canada to connect directly with Canadians who A, don't engage with traditional media like TV or radio, and B, who feel abandoned or overlooked by our leaders at the federal level. The overall cost for our proposed Stand on Guard strategy is estimated to be between $5.38 billion and $8.26 billion. By investing and managing these areas, we will reaffirm Canada's sovereignty and position ourselves as a proud and stable nation within the newly emerging global landscape. The power of our people united is crucial and is going to take work to get Canadians to feel like custodians who jump on board with this strategy and return to our former unity culture of decades past. We need to remember that diversity is our strength, otherwise it will become increasingly difficult to stay together as a country. Thank you for your time today.
I am so thankful that you had the ability to wake up so early in the morning, and you're the first team. It's always hard to go first. So we were very, very impressed that you're both first and presented us with an extremely interesting take on national security. I will also say from a personal perspective, my daughter went to Dalhousie and loved it there. So you have a personal relationship with each of the schools. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague on the committee, Kimberly, to talk specifically about risk and about disinformation and misinformation. Kimberly?
Thanks. Thanks very much for your presentation this morning. A lot to think about and super interesting. I have a question for you related to, as my colleague said, the disinformation and social cohesion pillar. In your strategy, you identify meme-based radicalization and extremism as one of the emerging threats. And I'm wondering how or what concrete mechanism you're going to use to ensure that as the federal government, we can counter this disinformation at scale without it looking like we're trying to police political speech and then end up eroding public trust. And could you speak to that, please?
Certainly. So as I mentioned, following Bill C-18, the perception from like a lot of Canadians who didn't realize the background of it, where it had to do with like the royalties were, wanting Meta and Google to pay, to help support Canadian journalism. After the platforms banned any news on the website, a lot of Canadians didn't know about that inner working on the political level. They just saw that and they thought, oh, like the government's trying to, keep us into the dark so that they can do whatever they want, was like, a lot of people's perception of that when it happened. So like, I think that was really damaging. Like, I understand why they were trying to, make some revenue to help, support, small and independent, Canadian news outlets and things, but it kind of backfired because a lot of Canadians now took it as our government's trying to keep us in the dark. And I think it's really harmful because now with that vacuum on social media, a lot of people my age, don't watch traditional TV. Like we've got a satellite that came with like our internet package and we haven't even plugged it in. So, it comes down to, I guess, in terms of the mechanism, I think we really need to try to get, I'm not saying Canadian government needs to be like, we don't need Carney tweeting a million times a day or anything like that, like other leaders. But I think we do kind of need a bit more of a direct connection, because I think there's a disconnect between the people and the leaders in our country, and I'd really like to see that relationship improve. And I think, a different strategy that's a little bit more personable, I guess, that helps connect with people, might help with the current feelings of our government's abandoned us and keeping us in the dark. So I'm not sure if that answers that question.
Thank you so much. You have a very, very broad strategy and involves all sorts of areas that are not specifically related. I'm going to pass it over to my committee colleague Violetta to talk about strategy and implementation. Violetta?
Yes, thank you, Noah. Good morning, team. Thank you very much for your presentation. So my question is more around that 4-year implementation roadmap that you showed us for each of those pillars of change here. So as you operationalize your strategy, there is a need or tension to balance between strengthening capabilities over time to sustain the change over time to reach a goal for each of those pillars, while at the same time, we need to be prepared to respond immediately. So how does your strategy balance those competing demands, the long-term and the immediate urgents? Some thoughts around that, please. Thank you.
I think that one thing that each of our strategies does well is it's iterative and it builds over time. So I don't think that any one pillar of our strategy starts at 100%. It's a slow build process. And I think that sort of part of what Caitlin alluded to is that there's a lack of transparency and communication. And one of the things is when sudden changes happen, people tend to make assumptions about why they occurred. Whereas in each of our pillars, there's a slow rollout where not everything's done in year one. By the end of year 4, we're starting to get where we want to be. If we had another 4 years after that, we could build on top of it. So it's layers. We're building a foundation for the direction that we want the country to go. But that leaves room for transparency and communication, because I think, as we all know, when we take on a lot, we tend to do everything less effectively and to a lower quality. So I think, for example, I'm not going to speak to someone else's pillar, but in my pillar, I think that part of the reason that we're standing up a small digital sovereignty secretariat and publishing what we consider high sensitivity data, that's to sort of set the tone so that people can adjust. And in that first year, the adjustment occurs. And in the second year, we can work through whatever adjustments need to be made to the approach. And that's how you get buy-in. You don't get buy-in by flooding people, I think. So I feel that I hope that answers your question, but that's sort of the approach that we took in each of these pillars. We just took it in different ways because each envelope is so unique.
Thank you so much. Your broad strategy doesn't deal as directly with defense, national defense, D&D type of national defense, and except for the Arctic part, I would say. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Vincent to ask a question maybe on that topic.
You read my mind, Noah. I do want to focus on the Arctic if I could. And I was very glad to see the amount of attention that you do pay to the Arctic and Arctic surveillance in particular. I have a couple of quick questions for you. One is, I was a little surprised I didn't see anything about how Canada would work with partners in the Arctic region, in particular allies. This is a region that's fraught right now, and we've got the United States as both an ally and a potential competitor. We've got NATO crowding in. We've got Nordic states as part of NATO crowding in. How would you work, or how would you propose that Canada works with those allies and partners? And then a sub question, if I could you tell me a little bit more about CASA and this body? Why would you put it at the Privy Council office? At one point, I think you said that it was at the cabinet level. Is it at the cabinet level? Would it be a cabinet body? It would be in the Privy Council office, because one is at the political level and one is at the public service level. And how would this, if it is a PCO, how would it relate to the mandate of the National Security and Intelligence Advisor, who's at PCO as well? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much for your question. If we can move to slide 20, please. So the first question, I believe, was in regards to how would CASA work with different actors. So, and Scott talked about this earlier. This is a 4-year plan. So what we want to do is we want to work on consolidation first, and we want to provide direction before moving forward. So we make sure that direction matters more than speed. So the way that CASA works is CASA would centralize Arctic coordination through legislated authority and would report through the Privy Council office with oversight from the National Security Committee of Cabinet. And it would integrate Arctic domain awareness while preserving departmental operational expertise. So this model would clarify mandate, centralize accountability, and enable whole of government coordination without duplicating capability. It would align with Westminster principles of centralized strategic coordination while respecting departmental specialization. In regards of coordinating with other allies and other international actors, we would do our best to make sure that we are building allies, whether that is in Northern Canada, Greenland, etc., and also making sure that we're respecting Indigenous sovereignty. So CASA is a federal coordination authority and not a territorial override. And it would be integrating federal surveillance mandates and also embedding an Indigenous Arctic Advisory Council just to make sure that Northern voices are heard. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks very much.
We have about 30 seconds left. So can someone comment possibly on very quickly the role of the military in this, or is there a role in the military in any of these pillars?
For the Arctic security portion, definitely. I would say. I know, at least for my province in Newfoundland and Labrador, there's potentially going to be a fair bit of involvement with. We have the Diana facilities in Holyrood and in St. John's in our province. So, there's been a bit of talks about within the military here in our province about how this is going to impact us with the Arctic sovereignty in the Labrador half of our province. So yeah, I would say that the military will most certainly be a vital part of this.
We're going to have to end it there. That's the end of our time, unfortunately. Thank you.